So let's put our knowledge to the test. I just got a really quick quiz for you. So this is my PPE statement. So Miguel is wearing long sleeve shirt, long pants, socks, shoes. He's going to add some protective eyewear. He's got chemical resistant gloves in category A, which is all of the materials. So nitrile is fine. It says down here, he needs a dust mist, NIOSH approved respirator. Okay. Well, is that it? We checked off this, and this. Is there anything else that Miguel is supposed to be wearing, or is he finished? He's ready to make this application. Tell me in the chat, please. Okay, so Sarah and Ryan say coveralls. Christina says chemical resistant apron. Okay, so Christina, if you were mixing and loading, then yes, a chemical resistant apron. So a lot of people are saying coveralls, and that's true because he's applying a signal word with the EPA registered label says danger. So even though it's not listed on the label, there are still California requirements that come into play. Let me just give you a plug. So my staff and I are doing monthly webinars. And so if on pesticide safety topics, so if you need continuing education, if you just want to know more about this, come to our webinar. So we'll give you the link in just a minute to find us. So I've just gone through all of this. So we review all different concepts like spills and storage and transportation, PPE. We talk about all these awesome topics. And we're fun, and it's only an hour. So you only have to listen to us for an hour at a time. So I've gone through, all these PPE requirements like on the label and California, but sometimes you don't have a label. Okay. So here, let me just step back and say, if you're using an EPA registered label, it's not registered in California, so it's experimental, but you have a label, then follow the label required PPE and the California regulations. Okay. So keep that in mind. So if you do actually have a label, even if you're using it off label or in conflict with the label, then follow the label instructions and then the California code that I just told you. But if you are working with an unregistered pesticide, then you need to look at the safety data sheet essentially for some hazard statements. And then that'll give you some indications for what type of PPE you wear. But just keep in mind, you're always going to be wearing long sleeve shirt, long pants, socks, closed-toed shoes, protective eyewear, chemical resistant gloves. That is your minimum. Okay. Registered, unregistered, organic, not organic. That is the minimum that you should be wearing when you're applying pesticides. So if you don't have a registered label, you have to wear at least the minimum PPE, period. That's it. End of story. There's no exceptions to the minimum. I'm sorry. When you're using an unregistered pesticide, just protect yourself. So, but it's also important to check section 2 of the safety data sheet. It has hazards identification. So it has like hazard statements that are equivalent to label statements on precautionary statements. So you can see the potential hazards by each route of exposure. So I think that I have some examples. So if your hazard statements are equivalent to category 1 for eye or skin damage, category 1 is a danger or danger poison pesticide. Category 1 is the most toxic. So if you look at the safety data sheet and you have some information that says fatal or fatal if absorbed into the skin, that's category 1. Okay, that's bad. Maybe fatal if absorbed onto the skin. Corrosive causes extreme eye damage. Those are hazard statements that are equivalent to category 1, which means everything that you're wearing as a minimum is not enough anymore. Okay, you need to add coveralls over your long sleeve shirt and long pants. You're already wearing protective eyewear, chemical resistant gloves, and socks. But now, in addition to just your regular work boots, you are going to be wearing chemical resistant footwear. If your pesticide says fatal if absorbed into the skin, don't wear leather boots. I mean, just wear the rubber boots, okay, please. And then always chemical resistant headgear for overhead exposure, which means if spray is going to be falling onto your head, okay? So like in an air blast situation, that's a possibility. And then when you're mixing and loading, use a chemical resistant apron and then add that face shield for the mixing and loading, you know, for splash control. So if you have hazard statements on an SDS that are equivalent to category 1 for systemic toxicity, meaning fatal if inhaled, fatal if swallowed, or may be fatal if inhaled, or may be fatal if swallowed. Like if this is fatal or irreversible in reference to inhalation or ingestion, you are dealing with a category 1 pesticide and you need, and the minimum is just not enough. It's simply not enough. So you're already wearing your long sleeve shirt, long pants, protective eyewear, chemical resistant gloves, socks, and closed toed shoes. You need to add respiratory protection. You have to be fit tested for it, but you need to wear a respirator. Okay. And I would suggest elastomeric with the OV cartridges with the P100 filter on top. That's what I'm going to tell you, because that's the most protective that you can get. And you don't know, you don't have a label statement to identify the exact respirator. And then again, chemical resistant headgear for overhead exposure. So if it's going to spray on top of your head, then protect your head. I mean, hello. And then when mixing and loading, always use a chemical resistant apron and then that face shield. Okay. So, oh, I gave you an example. Look, so this is gramoxone and this is paraquat. Okay. So you know that this is bad stuff. So section 2 is always hazards identification. Then they have these hazard statements. So these, if you have a label, precautionary statements are going to be essentially the same as these hazard statements. They're very equivalent. So fatal if, maybe fatal if, corrosive, causes irreversible damage, that's equivalent to category 1. Minimum PPE is not enough, okay? So this one says maybe corrosive to metals. I mean, I've never seen a hazard statement like this before. The paraquat is real serious. Toxic if swallowed, causes serious eye damage. Fatal if inhaled. If you're not wearing a respirator, you should absolutely not go anywhere near this pesticide. So, you know, our unregistered pesticides, we don't know exactly what they, you know, we just don't have all the same information. So we have to make some educated decisions. So anyways, I'm going to quietly step off my soapbox because I have a lot of feelings about this. It looks like there might be a question. Do I need to, is this a good time to address it?
Yeah. So the question is, what qualifies as chemical resistant headgear?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. So I wish I had one here. So like those hard hats that are made out of, gosh, I don't know what they're made out of, but they're chemical resistant. You can find them where you find your PPE. So it's not just a regular construction hard hat, although those are probably chemical resistant. But if you want to be sure, look at the technical specifications to make sure that they're chemical resistant. And you can buy them where you buy your regular PPE. That's headgear. So there are other, like there are these hats that are made out of the same thing as like those rain suits, like they're probably made out of PVC, frankly, which is chemical resistant. So anything on that list of chemical resistant gloves, those are chemical resistant materials. So like if you find a suit made of PVC or neoprene, I don't know, not a wetsuit though, those are chemical resistant. So there are hats that are made, I believe, out of PVC, but they're like a little bit floppy, so they're imperfect. You can wear those, or you can wear the hard hat. The problem with the hard hat is, you know, the brim comes out, but then your neck is exposed. So then I tell people to wear the coveralls with the hood, put the hood over the hat. You could wear it the other way around too. So you could put the hood on and then the hat on. However, it fits better and it's more stable. So yeah, that's a good question. So we're getting into training requirements. So basically people have to be trained in order to work with pesticides or around pesticides. I mean, I'll give you the details, but that's the gist of it. Okay. So do you have any unlicensed pesticide applicators that work under your supervision? So for example, you're a researcher, you have a QAC in research and demonstration, and then you have like 2 people who work on some of your sprays. They're out in the field with you when you're making the application. They're handing you the different bottles. They're switching out the jugs on your small plot trials. Well, those people have to be trained. Okay, they need to be trained annually. So how about, do you have field workers that work under your supervision? So people who are working in a field where pesticides have been applied, they're pulling weeds, they're checking traps, they're taking soil samples, they're moving irrigation pipe. They're field workers. They have to be trained every year on pesticide safety. So you must include information on pesticide hazards and safety prior to the handling of any pesticides. Basically, you have to be compliant with section 6724 and 6764, which are the training regulations. So I have a diagram of a treated field. I don't know if Katrina wants to, I can't remember if you did this last time, but if you want to chime in, then unmute and then just do it. Otherwise, I can proceed. So let me give Katrina a second to tell me what to do.
I'll let you proceed, Lisa. This slide wasn't in the presentation last time, so I don't quite recognize it, although I do know what a treated field is.
Okay.
So,
okay, then I misunderstood, and that's totally fine. So a treated field, this is a definition. This is very important. A treated field is a definition that is specific to an ag situation. So if you're doing research on a non-ag commodity, non-production commodity, there's no treated field, okay? But if you are, then there is. So if you're working in walnuts, or if you're working in a nursery setting and you're producing ornamental plants, that's ag, okay? So a field that has been treated with a pesticide or has had a restricted entry interval in effect in the last 30 days, that's a treated field. And when one of your employees, if you or an employee are in a treated field, they have to have some training prior to entering that field. So during a pesticide application, so this is like, as we go from left to right on the screen, time is going forward, okay? And so during the pesticide application, the only people who can be in that field during the pesticide application are people who either have a certificate, QAL, QAC, or they're trained as a pesticide handler. Okay, if you're in the field but you're not applying the pesticide, you still have to be trained as a handler. You can't be like swapping out like the jugs on your research backpack sprayer and not be trained as a handler. And you also got to be wearing PPE. Okay, so the minimum age for pesticide handlers are it's 18. I don't think that's an issue here at UC. Not to say that, anyways, I'm not going to say that. So as soon as the application is over, what starts as a restricted entry interval, and that's mostly an ag construct. So I applied thiamethoxam and strawberries. I don't know, whatever. And my restricted entry interval is 24 hours. So from the time that the application is completed for the next 24 hours, there's a restricted entry interval, meaning we notify all workers not to enter. And if we need somebody to enter, then they have to, at a minimum, have early entry training. So if you've already had handler training, you have already had early entry training. Pesticide handler training is like QAC or QAL is like the Cadillac, and then pesticide handler, Cadillac being good. When I was growing up, that was like the gold standard. So pesticide handler is like the Volkswagen. No, I don't want to rank people. I'm just saying it's like a higher level of training. Doesn't make you better, but it's just like you have more training as a handler than you do as an early entry employee. So okay, whatever. So, and you have to be at least 18 years old to enter the restricted entry interval, enter the field during the restricted entry interval. But let me just be clear. Nobody is to enter the field during restricted entry interval unless you have PPE training, you're at least 18, and you have a good reason. You don't just send people into the field during the restricted entry interval. There's a very good reason why that entry is restricted. Okay, for safety. So the REI has expired. then for the next 30 days, oh, this isn't exactly, okay, for the next 30 days after the REI expires, you can't enter the field to do any work unless you've at least had field worker training. And then if, 30 days after the REI expires, you don't make any more pesticide applications, then anybody can enter. So there's certain times during the season when we don't need this pesticide specific training because pesticides haven't recently been applied. Oh gosh. So this is a treated field during the pesticide application, during the restricted entry interval, and then 30 days after that REI has expired. That's a treated field, meaning somebody has to have certain level of training to be in that field at all, period. But after that, it's not a treated field. People can go in, take leaf samples, whatever. But the thing is, most of the time you're making multiple applications in a season, so that 30-day cycle is starting over and over and over. That 30+ day cycle is starting over and over and over again. So are there any questions on who needs to be trained or what's a treated field?
Sarah's answering a question right now in the Q&A about whether you need pesticide handler or field worker training if you have a QAC or QAL. And this question did come up in the last webinar. So maybe I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, so if you have a QAL or a QAC, you're considered trained. So this is very specifically for people who do not have a QAL or a QAC. I mean, you still are not supposed to go in during the REI, right? Without having PPE and a good reason, but you don't have to have the training, okay? Because you're already trained. QAL, QAC is a higher level of training. You know more. You've been trained on more, not that you know more, you've been trained on more concepts. Yeah. Any other questions that have come up? Okay, so fieldwork during pesticide applications. Fieldwork is not permitted in a field where a pesticide application is happening. So if you are trained as a field worker, I know that you are, right? You're trained because otherwise you wouldn't be going to a treated field. You go out to the field and you're supposed to be, I don't know, collecting insects. But you see, like in the far corner of the field, somebody's making a pesticide application. Should you go into that field? Yes or no? You can tell me in the chat. I mean, say it out loud. I'm not going to hear it, but you could also tell me in the chat. So if you go to collect insects in a field and you find that, it's a far corner, but it's the same field, somebody's making an application. No, you absolutely cannot enter that field. And if your supervisor tells you to enter the field, you say, nope, somebody's applying pesticides. I'm not going in there. I'm not supposed to. It's against the law. This is not safe. Okay, so then the reverse situation is also true. So you arrive at a field to make an application, and in the far corner, you see a group of employees or a person. It just can be any person, people, because we're all people, and they're collecting insects. And then you can't start that application if there are other people in the field. You guys need to have a conversation. Like, okay, how long have you been out here with these insects? Okay, because I need to make this application. And when are you going? Okay. So let me be clear. No field work when a pesticide is being applied. The only people in the field during that application are people who are participating in the application and essential to the application, and they either have a QAL, QAC, or pesticide handler training. Okay, so I have a quick poll for you. We don't need to wait for all of the people on this one. I just want to get a general sense.
Okay. So this poll's asking, do you have students that work for you in a treated field that are compensated either with an hourly wage or with credit towards their degree? Yes or no? All right. Most people have responded.
Okay. So there's no right or wrong answer. It's just simply a polling question. So it looks like it just depends, right? So if you do have students who are working, like grad students, undergrads, it doesn't matter. If that student is a person, which I'm pretty sure they all are. I don't think we have any robot students yet. So we have students who are human beings. And if they're out there doing work and they're getting paid for that work, they're employees. They are not volunteers. They're employees in that they're compensated either with money or with credit, or I don't know what else. I don't want to envision that, but they're employees, meaning if they're out there doing field work in a treated field, they have to, at a minimum, have field worker training. The training that they get is sort of equivalent to the work that they're going to be doing, right? So they have to have this annual pesticide safety training. Okay. So training resources, you know, contact us. Don't go to that website. I don't have training resources there. They're not up to date. Sorry. But you can email us at OPIC. We don't have everything that everybody needs. I'm just going to say that. So, and that's becoming clear to me recently, but anyways, we also don't have funding to do what we're supposed to do. So, okay. So if you need training resources, then, I mean, you can get handler and field worker training from outside safety trainers. So MVP up in Woodland, there's some people in the Valley as well. So you're welcome to go outside. I'm not the one-stop shop all training. I have done a field worker and handler training for UC employees. It was sort of a little outside of my regularly scheduled trainings, but it was necessary. And so we're trying to find ways to make that more available, but also people can get training outside the UC as well. I'm not going to hurt my feelings. So Ryan has a question on AEZs in the chat. So let me see if you're spraying and somebody rides a bike past. Okay. So irrespective of the AEZ, I'm going to, you know what, Ryan, I mean, that's a good point, but I'm going to ignore the AEZ because we have this regulation in California. I think it's 6614 and it has a lot of words in it, but essentially it says you cannot start an application or continue an application if there is a possibility that your spray will come into contact with people that are not participating in the application. So field workers, bystanders, bike riders. So if your spray is going to come into contact with people who are not involved in the application or property of whomever, you know, just things, or pets and wild animals. So people, pets, and people, animals, and things, then you have to stop your application. So you can't start an application if there's a possibility that you're going to drift and touch people, things, and animals. And if you've started your application and things are going fine, but the wind changes and it turns out you think there's a possibility that your spray is going to come into contact with the people in the neighboring field, then you can't continue that application until you've ensured that you're not going to harm other people. So it's irrespective of, you know, this regulation is irrespective of distance. It doesn't matter if you're in the same field, if you're in a neighboring field, or if you're 100 feet down the road. Your spray can't come into contact with people who aren't involved in the application, any kind of an animal, domesticated or not, and things like cars, houses, whatever. So I hope that that answers your questions, but because it's just like way more encompassing than the AEZ. The AEZ gets a little complicated. So try not to talk about it ever.